Guys, it's Shelf Life, and it's time for me to finally make good on something I told you over a year ago. When I introduced the show, I said sometimes I'm not going to talk about books. Sometimes I'm going to talk about other things that also get proudly displayed on the shelf. And then I just never did it. I just stuck with books the whole time. So now we're changing that up. And this is for November. It's getting cold out. And you're going to start staying inside more. You might even want a little something to warm you, especially depending upon how far north you are. And so today I want to tell you guys about a really old movie. So old that, holy crap, we're nearing a century ago when it came out. This movie is called 5 Star Final. This movie stars Edward G. Robinson, more on him in a second, Marion Marsh, and another famous name, Boris Karloff. And it was put out by Warner Brothers, or at least they are distributing it at some point here. And why am I telling you about such an old movie? I started a little bit of a bonanza for movies/television as I was continuing forward with my true bonanza regarding video games. And I started all the way back towards the end of the silent film era into the early days of the talkies. But early on, there wasn't really a whole lot that I thought, yeah, I want a copy of this on my shelf. This isn't the first one, but it's one of the first ones. And being that it's in 1931, it's a really interesting time for films at that point. We have to start off talking about the Hays Code. You may have heard of some movies around this time being called pre-code films. If you don't know what that means, real briefly, it was one of those times where people just felt like they didn't know what to expect out of Hollywood, especially once people started talking. The way things were filmed were getting better. You're getting better technology. You were able to do more with it. And they were a little worried people might take it, quote unquote, too far. Yeah, I'm talking about censorship, really, because you know the things we're talking about. We're talking about sex, we're talking about violence, we're talking about drugs, you know, all the good things in life. And people just didn't want to have it in their films. And by people, I mean, you know, those who, instead of just saying they won't watch that movie, they were instead saying nobody should watch that movie. What I found so interesting when I actually sat down to watch these is I got it. I understood a whole lot more about why you point out when a movie is pre-code or not, because it quite literally shows the way wild range of topics that would get discussed in a movie that you would go, they were talking about that back then? It just seems so strange. And this movie is actually one of them. The basic plot of this film is that there is a newspaper that is essentially a tabloid. But they actually want to get out of the tabloid business. They want to become a real serious newspaper of record. And they think that they've got the right idea about how to kick off this new plan, which is to go back to a story that they had covered 2 decades earlier about a murder, and to follow up with one of the people who was a suspect, but I don't remember at the moment if she was guilty or not. I think she was, but was acquitted. I really should have checked that before I started this. They want to follow up with her, and it just so happens that at the time they want to follow up with her, she's in the process of getting married, and she's not so open about what had happened before, because of course not. You don't want to, hey, I shot my boss. Oh, where are you from? You know, like, it's not how you introduce yourself to people. And so the movie goes to show that this hardline drive to get this story just because you think becoming more legitimate will help you earn more revenue for your business actually has a real human side cost that ends up with death threats, suicides, and just all sorts of things you wouldn't expect from a film that came out in 1931, you know? And it is fantastically laid out, fantastically acted. And I mentioned I wanted to point out Edward G. Robinson. That is one of those names that you hear it and you go, oh yeah, I've heard of this guy's name before. I don't necessarily know anything that I could list him as being in that I saw because it was so long ago. But this dude is actually really amazing. He's played some of these gangster mob parts that are iconic. When you see these early roles, the way he talks, the way his face looks when he does it, he's your classic Italian style tough guy mobster that you're not surprised to see in a film from the 1930s, setting the stereotype tone for decades to come. And then you learn about him and you go, oh, this guy is actually extremely quiet, keeps to himself, and manages to not only be brilliant, but had a lot to do with fighting stuff like HUAC and trying to deal with being delisted as an actor because he wasn't willing to just name names, you know? And I just felt like this was a great role for him because it kind of shows the pressure that he would, in a decade or two later from when he's doing this, he himself would actually be in. And he much more quickly in real life made the right choices, unlike his character in this film, who takes his time to get there. It's a really enjoyable watch. And it's from such an old film with such an awkward title. When I saw it, 5-star final, I had no idea what it was referencing. It almost felt to me like it was going to be a movie about, you know, some basketball league as far as I could tell. And it wound up becoming a serious movie, well acted, showing you what we were willing to discuss in our broad media in film before people started to say, nah, you can't have those topics in film. Gotta wait till there's yet another revolution among the thought processes of our citizenry before you can see this again. So there you go. Probably not what you expected when I said films. And I think early on, whenever I do cover these, they're probably going to be much older ones at first because, I mean, once you get to the more recent films, you probably have heard of them. You probably have seen them. And what am I really going to tell you? Other times I might go with something more recent and be like, hey, do you remember this film? Do you remember how great this was? Well, I checked it out again and it holds up. That kind of thing. So thanks for joining me and, enjoy the popcorn and I will see you next month.